Ci siamo chiesti allora perché Mosè ed Elia appaiono nella trasfigurazione.
We then asked ourselves why Moses and Elijah appear in the Transfiguration of Jesus on Mount Tabor. Although the liturgy seems to guide us towards an answer, that Moses represents the law and Elijah represents the prophecy, we seek to delve deeper. Why specifically Moses and Elijah are witnesses here, as the Father's voice will declare, that Jesus is the Son of God, that Jesus is truly God. To understand this, we must turn to the Old Testament. Moses and Elijah are key figures in the salvation history of the Old Testament. Specifically Moses, who is the leader, the great leader of Israel, whose life spans from the beginning of the book of Exodus to the end of the book of Deuteronomy, his existential journey spanning 4 books of the Old Testament. In the book of Exodus, we learn about his birth, his call on Mount Sinai, where he then leads the people after being freed from Egypt, from Exodus chapter 19 onwards, to receive the gift of the law at Sinai. Therefore, the architect Barluzzi wanted Moses to be depicted here in this chapel, right at the entrance, under one of the bell towers of the modern sanctuary of the Transfiguration, holding the tablets of law with Mount Sinai in the background. Behind Moses, you can also see the burning bush, the place where God called Moses, from which God chose Moses as the liberator of his people, on a high mountain of the Old Testament, Mount Sinai. Why is the story of Moses connected with the episode of the Transfiguration? We read about the preparation for the gift of the law on Mount Sinai by God. We are currently in Exodus chapter 19, verse 9 onwards. The book says,
Di Dio. Siamo al capitolo 19 dell'Esodo, dal versetto 9. Il libro dice così: Il Signore.
The Lord said to Moses, I am going to come to you in a dense cloud, so the people will hear me speaking with you, and will always put their trust in you.
Dunque una densa nube.
Then a dense cloud, and then we have a certain temporal sequence. From verse 16, for example, it says, On the morning of the 3rd day, there was thunder and lightning, with a thick cloud over the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke, because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. The sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder. Then Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him.
Ecco, una densa nube sul monte.
Here again a dense cloud over the mountain. And we have already heard of this dense cloud that also covers the Mount of the Transfiguration. And here occurs a revelation, thunder, lightning, and the mountain all smoking. This indicates a theophany, a divine manifestation of primary magnitude, of primary importance in the Old Testament. Here the people on Mount Sinai, that is where the book of Exodus tells us under the guidance of Moses, will receive the gift of the law throughout the rest of the book of Exodus, and then in the book of the Leviticus, and still in a part of the book of Numbers, continue to receive the gift of this law. Thus this mountain, Mount Sinai, the mountain of Moses, becomes one of the most important places. The people react to the revelation of God, trembling with fear. Is this not what we have also heard in the episode of the Transfiguration? Did not the 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John, also fear when the dense cloud, as in the case of Moses, enveloped Mount Tabor at the moment of Jesus' transfiguration? Thus here, on this mountain in which Moses had a special experience of God. And how is this experience qualified? We then see in chapters 33 to 34 of the book of Exodus. Moses, after receiving the gift of the law, the 10 Commandments, as seen indeed in the image behind me, engraved by the finger of God onto the stone tablets. Now we see in chapter 25 to 31, after Moses listened to God's instructions in the book of Exodus on how the mobile sanctuary, that is the tent of the meeting, the place that would accompany the presence of God among the people as they wandered in the desert. See, as indicated in chapter 32, while Moses is still on the mountain talking with God, receiving these instructions on how the sanctuary should be built and the various instructions about the law, at that very moment, the people at the base, at the foot of the mountain, are sinning, committing what is their original sin, that is, the sin of the golden calf. Because Moses is delayed in coming down from the mountain, the people sin by constructing a golden calf and worshipping it, as if it were probably a representation of God of Israel, or the pedestal on which the God of Israel would have placed his feet. But when Moses comes down from the mountain and sees the people who have perverted themselves, he breaks the tablets of the covenant, the tablets of the law, and asks the people to be able to intervene on their behalf, to be able to intercede. Then Moses goes back up to the mountain and tries, through a dialogue with God, to obtain forgiveness for the people from God. And what does Moses do? How does Moses pray to the Lord?
Come Mosè prega il Signore.
Moses, in fact, inside his prayer of intercession, asks a very strange question of the Lord. He asks God. We are now in Exodus chapter 33, verse 18. He asks God this: "Now, show me your glory." And the Lord replied, "I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion." But, he added, "you cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live." The Lord said, "Here is a place near me. You are to stand on this rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft in the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand, and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen." Thus Moses asks God, during the prayer of intercession, that God reveal his glory, his face, to Moses. And it is something very similar to what happened on this mount, on Mount Tabor, when the 3 disciples see the glory of God on the face of Jesus. Indeed, in the whole person, we can say, of Jesus. Thus it is as if that vision of the glory of God that was in some way denied to Moses, as we heard God say, "No man can see me and live." Here, that vision of the glory denied to Moses happens in the Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus is the perfect revelation of the glory of God, of the glorious face of the Father. Jesus is the perfect revelation of this goodness, that is the glory, the way of manifesting the glory of God, the goodness, the grace, the mercy that God will exercise towards his people. That is the way in which the glory of God will manifest, but not fully to Moses, who must be hidden inside a cleft on Mount Sinai, but will also be revealed to Moses when he, on this mountain, with Elijah, witnesses the transfiguration of Jesus. In Jesus, he will see the glory of the Father that was denied to him in Exodus 33. Indeed then, how does Exodus 34 begin? That Moses indeed cuts out 2 more tablets again to receive the gift of the renewed law from God. And at verse 5 it says, "Then the Lord came down in the cloud and stood there with him, and proclaimed his name, the Lord." That is, the Lord proclaims his own name in front of Moses. And he passed in front of Moses proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation. Moses bowed to the ground at once and worshipped. Then he said, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, Lord, let the Lord go with us. Although this is a stiff-necked people, forgive our wickedness and our sin, and take us as your inheritance."
Nella rivelazione che Mosè ha sul monte Sinai in una densa nube.
In the revelation that Moses has on Mount Sinai, in a dense cloud of the glory of God, which manifests as love, mercy, compassion, forgiveness, there Moses experiences fully the face of God, which is a merciful face. But Moses cannot fully see the face of this merciful God. His vision is postponed and delayed. But until when? Until the time when Moses will truly see the face of mercy of God, fully revealed in the face of Jesus here on Tabor. And after receiving, as we see in this chapter 34 of Exodus, the gift of the renewed law, Moses has a strange phenomenon. His face, his countenance becomes radiant. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the covenant law in his hands, he was not aware that his face was radiant because he had spoken with the Lord. But when Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, his face was radiant, and they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called to them. So Aaron and all the leaders of the community came back to him, and he spoke to them. Afterwards, all the Israelites came near him, and he gave them all the commands the Lord had given him on Mount Sinai. When Moses finished speaking to them, he put a veil over his face.
Cioè Mosè copre il proprio volto che irraggia la gloria del Padre.
That is, Moses covers his own face, which radiates the glory of the Father. But whenever he entered the Lord's presence to speak with him, he removed the veil until he came out. And when he came out and told the Israelites what he had been commanded, they saw that his face was radiant. Then Moses would put the veil back over his face until he went in to speak with the Lord again. Even St. Paul, in his second letter to the Corinthians, from chapter 3, verse 7 to chapter 4, verse 6, reinterprets this episode and says that this veil is still present on the face of the Israelites who have not adhered to the new covenant brought by Jesus. Jesus is then the new and definitive covenant that God comes to establish with his people. He is the voice of the Father, no longer Moses, the mediator whose face shone, but it is the face of Jesus that now shines fully on this mount. Because in Jesus, that word that the Father addressed to Moses, remember, as we read earlier in chapter 19, that indeed Moses spoke to God, and God answered him with a voice. Here, that voice with which God spoke to Moses now speaks to us through the Son. Jesus is then the new Moses, the true Moses, he whose face now shines with the glory of the Father, as on Mount Sinai the face of Moses shone with light, shone with the glory of God that had been revealed to him. And Jesus, no longer Moses, is the mediator of the new and eternal covenant, a covenant not intended only for the people of Israel, as the Mosaic covenant was, but open to all nations, to all those who will listen to the voice of Jesus, as the voice of the Father on Mount Tabor revealed to the disciples of Jesus, to Peter, to James, and to John. This is my Son. Listen to him.
Di Gesù, come la voce del Padre sul Monte Tabor ha rivelato ai discepoli di Gesù, a Pietro, Giacomo e Giovanni: questo è il figlio mio, ascoltatelo.
In the next installment, in the chapel dedicated to Elijah, we will discover his importance in this manifestation of the Son of God on Mount Tabor.
Open yourself to a gesture of solidarity and support the mission of the Custody of the Holy Land. The Christian Media Center spreads the good news of Jesus by making known to the world the spirituality of the holy places and the lives of the Christians who live here. Your contribution will help us bring the proclamation of the risen Lord, the most urgent of all, to men and women of every language and nation. To help us concretely, open the QR code Your choice makes a difference.